The first time my stepmother wore Mom's wine-red dress, they called it a tribute. The last time she wore it, I crashed onto the cold tile, tasting blood. I had always believed my Aunt Marissa was an outsider, yet she was secretly holding the truth that could burn down the entire Ross reputation. The night I was rushed to the ER, the dining room door swung open. Aunt Marissa was standing there, frozen, and everything shifted. They thought they still owned me, the easily controlled one. They were wrong. My name is Kimberly Ross, but right now, I'm just a broken form strapped onto a gurney, the metal cool against my lacerated skin. The world outside is a dizzying kaleidoscope of urgent blues and reds, the light show of the siren spinning through the tiny windows of the ambulance. Flash, spin, flash. Each pulse of color sharpens the phantom pain blooming in my shoulder and neck. The siren is a high-pitched, relentless shriek, a soundtrack to the absolute destruction of the last 20 years of my life. I try to focus, but the motion is too much. My brain a broken hard drive sputtering static. I blink, and the red light catches the lace on my dress. Not my dress, but the remnant of the dress. The wine-red lace, the color of spilled blood and cheap, celebratory liquor. In the chaotic, throbbing light, the image of that cursed garment is seared into my retina, swirling and mocking me. Lydia, my stepmother, standing over me, her chest heaving, wearing Mom's favorite thing. Ma'am, can you hear me? We're almost there. The voice is deep, professional, wearing the clipped, non-judgmental tone of an emergency medical technician who has seen this scene 1,000 times before. I can feel the cool touch of his gloved hand on my wrist, checking my pulse. I try to form a coherent sentence, but my mouth is dry, tasting copper and bile. My tongue feels swollen. I manage to mumble, the sound barely clearing my throat. "Who did this to you? Kimberly?" he asks again, leaning close. His breath smells faintly of mint. The question hangs in the air, heavy and absurd. Who did this? The question assumes a stranger, a mugger, a faceless attacker. I swallow hard. The truth, in all its ugly suburban banality, is so much worse. "My family," I whisper. The single word is heavier than the weight of the blanket they've tucked around me. He doesn't flinch. No shock, no gasp. Just a slow, deliberate nod that confirms what I already know. Domestic violence is just Tuesday night in America. He makes a notation on his pad with a small, quiet scratch, treating my admission as simply another data point. The static in my mind momentarily clears, and the fragmented memories flood back, propelled by the relentless beat of the siren and the vibration of the vehicle on the asphalt. It's not a smooth, linear film. It's a series of brutal snapshots. The sound of the spill. It was a glass of Pinot Noir, knocked off the mahogany dining table. It stained the pristine white linen tablecloth. And the sound Lydia made, a sharp, disgusted intake of breath, was worse than any yell. A small accident. But in the Ross house, small accidents were ammunition. Lydia's voice, low, venomous, cutting through the murmurs of the stunned guests. "Look at you, Kimberly, clumsy, always ruining things, just like your mother." That last part wasn't meant to sting. It was meant to annihilate. The fabric ripping, that was the worst sound of all. Not the lace of the dress tearing on my mother's old, silver belt buckle as Lydia lunged forward. No, it was the sound of the illusion tearing. The beautiful, delicate illusion of the Ross family's perfection. The sound of Mom's memory being actively, violently desecrated on the body of the woman who replaced her. That sound was a physical tearing in my chest. A new scent wafts over me. The EMT is adjusting a sterile gauze near my temple. The antiseptic smell, clean, sharp, suddenly twists, conjuring another smell entirely. It was my stepmother's signature, obscenely expensive designer fragrance. It was the scent I smelled 5 years ago. The first time I saw her pull Mom's dress, the dress Mom wore to her last New Year's Eve party, off the garment bag. She wasn't wearing it then. She was just admiring it. pulling it close to her chest with a proprietary, greedy look in her eyes. It was a casual violation, and that same smell had been thick in the air tonight, clinging to the velvet of the dining room chair just before she lunged. The rich floral scent mixed sickeningly with the sweat and the expensive perfume she wore. My hand automatically clenches into a fist. Something small and cold digs into my palm. My mother's necklace, the tiny silver, Art Deco locket. It was the only thing I had managed to grab, the only thing that hadn't been rearranged, updated, or co-opted by Lydia. Everything else in that house, from the throw pillows to the financial accounts, had been re-envisioned, but the locket was mine. Its intricate, cool metalwork is the only reality I can hold on to right now. It is perfectly intact, a defiant, tiny anchor against the storm. I remember Aunt Marissa. The door, the wide, polished mahogany door to the formal dining room. Mark, my father, had shoved me inside, right after I refused to sign the papers, right after I told him, loud enough for 20 guests to hear, that the house and the trust were mine, not his for restructuring. Mark held my arms, his grip surprisingly strong, the anger I'd seen him suppress for months finally breaking free. Lydia, magnificent and terrible in the wine-red dress, had been screaming. The first shove was sudden, sending me staggering toward the sideboard. Then, she hit me, with her open palm, her wedding ring catching the light, and then again, the fabric of the sacred dress flying across my face. That was the exact moment the dining room door opened. Aunt Marissa. I see her face as clearly as the siren lights now, utterly frozen. Her phone, an old model with a cracked screen, was half raised, aimed at the scene. The man holding his daughter. The woman in a dead sister's dress beating her. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't moving to intervene physically. She was just recording. Her face an unreadable mask of horror, betrayal, and calculation. That moment, that single 5-second tableau, was the pivot point of my entire existence. I hear new voices now. We must be pulling into the hospital bay. The ambulance slows to a halt, the siren dying down to a low, irritating hum. "Trauma Bay 6, a woman's voice barks. As they wheel me out, I hear fragments of conversation swirling over my head. Doctors, nurses, triage staff. They are talking about me, but not to me. Probable shoulder dislocation, blunt force trauma to the face, extensive bruising. Someone reads from the EMT's report. Then, the cold clinical verdict. Another one, domestic. Domestic. It's the official categorization. It's the stamp on the file. It's not abuse. It's just family stuff. I had spent years telling myself that. I had convinced myself that the emotional isolation, the financial control, the subtle psychological erosion, it wasn't abuse because no one ever hit me. Not until tonight. Not until Lydia thought she had 99% of the power. But to the medical staff, the physical evidence, the swelling, the lacerations, the pattern of injury, speaks volumes. They don't need my tearful, rambling testimony. They see the truth immediately, efficiently, and without judgment. They treat it as an undeniable, self-evident reality. Battered woman. Case file number 847. Blunt force trauma. There is a certain terrifying validation in their casual acceptance. I don't need to apologize for being hit. I don't need to defend my injuries. A nurse, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, leans over me. "Kimberly, we need to know who to call. Someone safe. We need an emergency contact who can get here." My mind races through the list. Mark? He was holding me down. Logan? My half-brother was standing there, laughing. Lydia? She was the one in the dress. I realize I have no safe contact. None in that house. None in that gilded cage in the suburbs. Except for the one person I had always kept at a distance. The one I convinced myself was too cool, too detached, too judgmental to care about the mundane drama of my life. I forced the name out, a croak of desperation and hope. Marissa. The nurse looks down at the EMT. Marissa? Ross? No. Different last name. I rasp, correcting them. Marissa. Just Marissa. I can't remember her full name. The fog is too thick. I just see her face, frozen in the doorway, the phone recording, the calculation behind the horror. The EMT leans down again, closer than before, blocking the worst of the fluorescent hospital light. He speaks quietly, his voice a low, steady rumble, completely shielded from the chaos around us. Your father, your stepmother, they're not here now. Kimberly. The words, simple, factual, professional, hit me with the force of an emotional tsunami. They're not here now. The threat is gone. The pressure of their controlling, suffocating presence, the pressure that had crushed me for years, that had just culminated in a physical attack, is for the first time in what feels like an eternity, lifted. In that cramped, sterile moment, surrounded by strangers, the scent of antiseptic, and the low hum of machinery, I experienced the deepest, most profound sense of temporary safety I have ever known. It is the safety of having the walls between me and my abusers manned by other people. It is the first breath of air taken outside the poisoned atmosphere of the Ross house. I close my eyes and clutch the locket, the tiny, perfect anchor, and let the professionals carry me toward the start of the rest of my life. I had been their victim for 20 years, but when I opened my eyes again, I knew. I was about to become the principal architect of my own safety. The woman they thought they owned had finally woken up. The throbbing pain in my shoulder is still a fierce, localized fire, but the drugs they gave me are creating a cool, gray distance between me and the hospital bed. In this quiet, medicated space, the high-speed terror of the ambulance slows to a steady, melancholic tide, pulling me back across the years, back to the house that was built to look like a dream but was engineered to be my cage. That house was located in the sprawling, affluent suburbs just outside Denver, Colorado. It wasn't merely a dwelling, it was a performance. 2 stories of perfectly aged brick, shutters painted exactly the right shade of federal blue, and a 3-car garage big enough to hold my father's expensive German sedan and Lydia's gleaming white SUV. The lawn was the star of the show, manicured, surgically green, cut weekly by a professional service, the kind of lawn that screamed, "We have no problems here, our life is perfectly ordered." And that was the mask the Ross family wore for the neighbors, for Mark's business associates, and for the world. They saw the annual holiday lights display that won the neighborhood prize, the polite wave from the window, the cheerful banter during the 4th of July barbecue. They saw the perfect patriarch, the flawlessly groomed second wife, and the 2 well-adjusted children. What they never saw was the silence inside the sun-drenched rooms, the subtle shifting of weight that eventually tipped me completely off balance. My mother, Sarah, died when I was 14 years old. It wasn't a dramatic accident or an act of malice. It was a quiet, relentless illness that slowly stole her away. There was no abuse, no cruelty in those final years, only the immense, shattering loss that ripped the foundation out from under me. Mom was my only advocate, the gravitational center of my little world. When she left, the atmosphere in the house thinned instantly, the air too cold to breathe. My father, Mark, handled the grief by becoming hyper-focused on work, on appearance, on anything that could fill the void with polished granite and quarterly reports. He dealt with emotional loss by updating the operating system of his life. The update arrived precisely 1 year after Mom's funeral. Her name was Lydia. She didn't sneak in. She arrived like a perfectly designed, high-resolution piece of furniture, ready to fill the empty space with style and efficiency. She was sleek, blonde, successful, a woman who understood the language of wealth and status that Mark spoke fluently. She was everything Mark had subconsciously decided his first wife had lacked in the competitive landscape of upper-middle-class Denver. She didn't bring warmth. She brought polish. She reorganized the pantry, digitized all the bills, and scheduled Mark's life with military precision. She was, in every sense, the perfect second act Mark had always wanted. She was the ideal update. Within 2 years of her arrival, Logan was born. Logan's birth was the official beginning of my subtle, gentle exile. I was already a teenager, approaching 17, when Logan arrived. As the oldest, I was instantly, automatically, and silently defaulted to the role of person in charge. While Lydia was praised for managing the household and Mark was celebrated for managing his career, I was given the unspoken, unending task of managing Logan. When Logan cried at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was the one roused by Lydia's sharp hiss. When he needed a last-minute sitter because Mark and Lydia had a fundraiser, I was told, "You're home anyway. Kimberly, we're family. This is how we help." My college applications were filled out between feeding Logan pureed peas and supervising his afternoon nap. My life became the unpaid, unacknowledged support staff for the new, perfect family unit. The contrast in attention was a slow, subtle poison. It didn't look like abuse to anyone on the outside. It looked like responsibility for the older daughter. Take birthdays. For instance, Logan's birthday was an annual spectacle. His first birthday involved a professionally catered backyard carnival, complete with a petting zoo and custom-made cupcakes costing what felt like hundreds of dollars. By the time he turned 5, the theme was always extravagant. A fully staged pirate ship, a Star Wars Jedi training camp, the guest list was long, and the gifts piled up in mountains, sometimes numbering more than 50. My birthdays? They never completely forgot, which was perhaps the cruelest part. My 18th birthday, the year I became a legal adult, was celebrated with a quick dinner reservation at a family restaurant, a hastily purchased, store-bought cake with thick, cheap frosting, and a gift card to a national coffee chain. Mark gave a brief, distracted toast about how proud he was of my independence the following year. I had to remind Mark that it was my birthday, and the celebration was a rushed 30 minutes of cake before Logan needed help with his science project. The message was loud and clear in its quiet execution. Logan is a precious investment. You are self-sufficient overhead. Mark's 2 pet phrases were the soundtrack to my youth, shaping my understanding of my place in the new hierarchy. For Logan, it was always, "Logan needs every opportunity to succeed in this changing world." This phrase justified the private tutors, the exclusive summer camps, the expensive sports equipment, and the promise of a top-tier university education paid for in full. It framed every expenditure on Logan as a crucial, non-negotiable investment in the future of the Ross name. For me, the phrase was, "You're strong. Kimberly, you'll be fine. You can handle it yourself." This phrase was used to dismiss my request for help with college applications, to explain why my old sedan needed to last 3 more years, and to justify why I didn't need a large allowance. It wasn't a compliment. It was a convenient dismissal. It designated me as the mature, reliable figure who could navigate the world's complexities without Mark's time, money, or emotional effort. It was the license for him to emotionally divest from me. And then there was the dress, the wine-red lace dress. It had belonged to my mother, Sarah. It was the dress she wore to the museum gala just 3 months before she became too sick to attend events. It was beautiful, rich, slightly vintage, and utterly sacred. After Mom died, it hung in the back of her closet, covered by a dry cleaning bag. I would often slip back there just to smell the faint residual scent of her perfume and the velvet lining. It was a relic, a silent shrine. Lydia changed that. When she reorganized the house 3 years into her tenure, she moved the dress. She didn't throw it out. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she had a clear, acrylic case custom-made and had the dress displayed on a dress form in the walk-in closet, right next to her vast collection of designer handbags. It was no longer a sacred memory. It was a trophy of completion, a piece of decor signifying that she had taken over the whole estate, right down to the artifacts of the previous queen. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a taunt, a visual reminder that she now owned the house, the man, and even the remnants of his first love. It sat there for years, collecting dust in its glass prison, until the night she decided to wear it, claiming she had it perfectly altered to fit her figure. The only person who seemed to notice the delicate psychological violence inherent in this arrangement was my Aunt Marissa, Mom's younger sister. She visited sparsely, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, always during holidays or obligation events. She never participated in the superficial family banter. While Mark and Lydia entertained guests, Marissa would stand back, sipping wine, doing more observing than speaking. I remember her standing in Lydia's walk-in closet one Christmas Eve, pretending to admire Lydia's new purse, but her eyes weren't on the leather. They were locked onto the wine-red dress in the acrylic case. Her gaze was intense, almost piercing, a look that held confusion, sorrow, and something else, something akin to cold, quiet calculation. She never mentioned the dress. She never mentioned the blatant favoritism toward Logan. She just watched, listened, and then she'd leave, vanishing back into her own life in Aurora, leaving me convinced she didn't care, that she was just another person who saw the perfect facade and refused to scratch beneath the surface. In retrospect, the years from 15 to 23 were a masterclass in subtle, non-physical psychological warfare. No one raised a hand. No one yelled an overt slur. The abuse was simply the act of systematic exclusion. I was systematically pushed out of the financial story, the emotional narrative, and the future planning of the Ross family. I was the silent, unpaid service provider, the one who was strong enough to handle being forgotten. I was slowly and gently written out of my own life. That subtle, gentle erasure made the violence of tonight, the physical shove, the wine-red fabric whipping across my face, so much more shocking. It proved that underneath the polite neglect, the structural violence of their control was always ready to become physically brutal the minute I dared to step out of the role they had assigned me. It proved that the mask of perfection was simply a thin, fragile veneer over something truly destructive. I wasn't a child anymore. I was a fully functioning adult, a data analyst for a company called Heliovera Dynamics, a sprawling, innovative tech firm just north of the city. I'd graduated at the top of my class, secured my job, and was pulling in a salary that, according to my own calculations, placed me comfortably in the upper $60,000 bracket. This was the first, and perhaps most significant piece of objective evidence that the Ross family narrative, that I was the strong, self-sufficient one who needed no resources, was fundamentally flawed. I had earned resources, and they were substantial. But I still lived at home. The reason, endlessly repeated by Lydia and Mark, was always the same. To save money, Kimberly, why waste $700 a month on rent when you can build capital here? It sounded financially sensible, the wise advice of caring parents. The reality was that it allowed Lydia to maintain a perfect, suffocating 90% control over my income. Every month, my direct deposit hit my account, and every month, my account was essentially emptied. Lydia managed the savings. She insisted on paying my student loans and my few credit card bills, which she had actually encouraged me to get, so I could establish a credit history. The rest, she explained, was being pooled into an investment account she and Mark managed for the family's future. I was given a weekly allowance of $50 cash, just enough for gas and coffee. I had tried, twice, to challenge the system, suggesting I manage my own savings, citing financial independence. Mark had shut it down with a paternalistic frown. "We've been doing this for years, kiddo. Trust us. We have the expertise. You focus on your metrics at Heliovera." The implication was clear. My work was in the abstract world of data. Their work was the real world, high-stakes game of wealth management. I was competent, but not that competent. I was a child playing with complex spreadsheets. The financial control was the motif of my adulthood, a quiet hum beneath every conversation. It was just another form of the isolation I had known since Logan was born. I was earning my independence, but they had engineered a perfect scenario where I was too financially crippled to actually leave. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared in early May, 3 months before the party. I was upstairs, folding laundry, my assigned household duty, when I heard their voices drift up from Mark's home office. They thought the door was closed and the soundproofing was sufficient. They were wrong. Lydia's voice was sharp, low, and urgent. It has to be done now. Mark, Logan starts college next year. He needs that initial capital. And frankly, the house is too valuable to be tied up in, well, that arrangement. Mark's reply was a frustrated growl. I know, but Sarah was meticulous. It's tied up, technically, until she gives the sign-off, or until we find a loophole in the original deed. Lydia's voice dropped even lower, conspiratorial, yet every syllable seemed to strike the floorboards like a tiny hammer. It's not the deed, Mark, it's the trust. But that trust, it only requires the signature. Her signature. She signs the release and amendment, and then we restructure the deed to put it jointly in our names, or Logan's. It's just one piece of paper. Mark, she never reads anything. We just need to get her to sign it. The air felt thin. I sank onto the carpet, the clean smell of dryer sheets suddenly nauseating. The house, the place I thought was merely a gilded prison, was something far more menacing. It was collateral. I wasn't saving money by living there. I was being maintained as the vulnerable, controllable party whose identity was inextricably tied to an asset they wanted. Just one piece of paper. She never reads anything. The words echoed in my skull. They weren't talking about a life insurance policy or a car title. They were talking about the entire Denver house, the property my mother had fought to buy, the legacy she had tried to secure for me. The shock of this realization was quickly followed by an unexpected lifeline. 2 weeks later, I received a text from Aunt Marissa. It was short, slightly stiff, and completely out of character. Coffee, mid-morning Saturday, the Bean Spot on 5th. I was nervous. I hadn't spent meaningful one-on-one time with Marissa since I was 11 years old. She was always a specter, present, but never close. The meeting was not comfortable. Marissa didn't make small talk about the weather or my job. She leaned forward over her espresso, bypassing the niceties and going straight to the core. Kimberly, she started, her voice a careful, low register. I need to ask you some sensitive questions about your mother's estate. Specifically, the house and your bank accounts. Don't tell Mark or Lydia we met. I was stunned into silence. Her sudden intensity was jarring. I stammered out the usual explanation about the family savings plan. She cut me off with a decisive wave of her hand. Stop. Tell me about the house. Do you know who holds the legal title? The current deed? I told her I assumed it was in Mark's name. Marissa closed her eyes for a long moment, letting out a heavy, silent breath. Before Sarah died, she had a lawyer draw up a revocable living trust, a specific type. She was very ill, but she was sharp until the end. She was also deeply worried about Mark's spending habits and his priorities. My heart started to pound hard against my ribs. I felt like I was sitting in the witness protection program. That house, Kimberly, the one you think you're living in to save money, is technically owned by the Sarah Ross Trust, and you, sweetie, are the primary beneficiary and sole trustee. It's been in your name, legally shielded from Mark's control, since you turned 18 years old. All the major assets, the house, the investment portfolio Mom built, they all belong to you. The words hit me like a physical blow, yet they were the sweetest words I had ever heard. The walls of the cage suddenly weren't made of steel. They were made of paper. I owned the house. My mother had saved me, years ago, without me even knowing. Marissa then explained that Mark could live there, but he couldn't liquidate it, leverage it, or mortgage it without the trustee's, my, signature. This explains everything: the secretive financial management, the forced residency, the hushed conversation in the office. They didn't need to control my life. They needed to control my signature. The moment I learned the truth, the dynamic at home shifted. Mark and Lydia became overtly aggressive in their need to restructure the family's assets. The demands started small. Lydia began casually referencing Logan's future transport needs. Logan needs a strong, reliable car for college, something like that new German SUV, It costs upwards of $80,000. We need to pull capital from somewhere. Then Mark started leaving files on the dining table, ostensibly about family refinancing. He'd walk past me, dropping thinly veiled hints. We need to make this house work harder for us. Kimberly, it's an asset, not a museum. The equity is just sitting there. We need your cooperation. It was psychological warfare. Constant, low-level pressure designed to wear down my new resolve. The breaking point came with a 2-page document concerning a home equity line of credit. The precise financial mechanism that would allow them to bleed the house dry without selling it. Mark handed it to me one evening with a pen, a look of tired expectation on his face. Just need your initials here and your signature at the bottom. Sweetheart, standard stuff. I looked at the line that read, Kimberly Ross, trustee. I felt the weight of the house, the trust, and my mother's final, desperate protection settling on my shoulders. I looked at the pen, then at my father's face, the man who had traded my mother's memory for Lydia's efficiency. My heart hammered so loud I thought they must hear it. My hand, for the first time in my adult life, refused to move. No, I said, the word barely a whisper, yet it felt like a gunshot in the pristine silence of the kitchen. Mark froze. He retrieved the file slowly, the paper crinkling under his tense grip. His face, usually a mask of controlled, corporate charm, turned a dull, furious red. He didn't yell. He merely said, his voice laced with venomous disappointment, "This is not a negotiation. Kimberly, you will do what is best for this family." That very afternoon, I met Marissa again. She didn't scold me for saying no. She praised my courage. She then opened her purse and pulled out a small, yellowed envelope. Inside was a piece of lined paper, creased and worn, my mother's handwriting. It was a handwritten codicil, a supplementary instruction to the trust, written in the hospital 3 weeks before her death. It wasn't legally notarized, but it was highly emotionally and contextually powerful. Marissa pointed to a sentence scrawled near the bottom, slightly shaky but firm. If Kimberly is ever coerced, pressured, or threatened into signing documents pertaining to this property, or if Mark attempts to force her hand through public pressure, the full control of the trust and all subsequent assets is to immediately shift to Kimberly and her Aunt Marissa, co-executors, for her protection. Her safety stands above all false claims of family unity. My mother hadn't just protected the assets. She had predicted the attack. She had provided the blueprint for my defense. The very next day, Mark and Lydia announced the Family Unity and Asset Celebration Party. They insisted on inviting all the close family friends, Mark's high-level colleagues, and Logan's mentors. The event was scheduled for the coming Saturday night. I knew instantly what it was. It wasn't a celebration. It was a perfectly staged, high-pressure execution. They needed my signature, and they planned to extract it in front of 35 witnesses, turning my final refusal into a massive public display of family disunity that would crush my reputation and my will. They thought they were setting a trap. They didn't know I had just been handed the keys to the entire maze. The psychological game had begun, and thanks to my mother and my aunt, I was no longer playing defense. The lawyer's office was located in a sleek glass tower downtown, miles away, both geographically and emotionally. From the sterile perfection of the Ross suburban home, the atmosphere inside the conference room was cold, minimalist, and utterly professional, a world where emotion was irrelevant, and only the binding power of ink on paper mattered. Marissa introduced me to Ms. Helena Vance, a crisp, silver-haired attorney who looked like she charged at least $600 an hour. Vance didn't waste time. She placed a heavy linen-bound document on the table, the Sarah Ross Irrevocable Living Trust, dated exactly 2 weeks before my mother's death. As Ms. Vance reviewed the complex language, the weight of the document felt like a physical anchor. I had known I was the primary beneficiary. I had known the house was mine. But then came the stunning, game-changing revelation. The primary beneficiary is, of course, Kimberly Ross, Ms. Vance stated. pointing to the relevant section. But the structure is unique. Your mother was incredibly foresighted. Kimberly. She didn't trust Mark to act in your best interest. She included a check and balance mechanism. She slid the paper across the mahogany table, highlighting the signature lines. Your co-trustee, with full binding authority and oversight, is Mrs. Marissa Hayes. I stared at the name, then at Marissa, who sat beside me, her usual guarded expression now replaced by one of grave, weary determination. My co-trustee. Marissa wasn't just my aunt. She was the legal key holder to my entire legacy. She held 50% of the power, mandated to act as my shield. The woman I had dismissed as aloof and detached had been legally bound to my protection for almost 10 years. Ms. Vance turned to the core of the document, the section my mother had insisted upon, the clause that elevated this from a standard inheritance case to a legal thriller. It was labeled the Coercion and Good Faith Clause. This is the critical part, Ms. Vance explained, tapping the paper with a manicured nail. It states that if Mark Ross or any party associated with him attempts to coerce, mislead, or financially pressure Kimberly into signing over or leveraging the assets, specifically the property and the investment portfolio, Marissa has the immediate sole authority to petition the court to sever Mark's executive rights to the trust, transferring 100% of all control to herself and Kimberly as co-trustees, effectively eliminating Mark's access entirely. In short, the moment they tried to force my hand, they would lose everything. The moment they stepped over the line of subtle control into overt pressure, the trap would spring. I finally asked the crucial question, the one I had been too afraid to voice. How much is everything? Ms. Vance gave me the numbers. The Denver property, which I thought was just a nice house, was valued near $1.5 million. The accompanying investment portfolio, Mom's personal retirement savings carefully managed by her own broker, was valued at over $750,000. My mother hadn't just left me a nest egg. She had left me a fortune, secured and defended against the exact menaces who were currently sharing my dinner table. The sheer scale of my mother's quiet, desperate preparation left me breathless. Once Ms. Vance had explained the strategy, that we needed a clear, undeniable act of coercion to trigger the clause, I turned to Marissa, demanding the truth. Marissa, why didn't you say anything? Why did you just watch? Marissa didn't flinch. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were filled with a profound sadness. I confess, I've been watching the Ross family for 7 years. Kimberly, not casually, actively. Your mother and I discussed this right before she passed. She knew Mark's character, his greed, but the trust was specifically designed to be revocable until you turned 25, or until you were clearly acting independently, until you became a legal adult. Mark held a precarious sort of authority if I had intervened too early, before you established your own career, before we had proof of his controlling behavior. Mark could have gone to court and argued that Sarah was mentally unsound when she wrote the clause, or that I was being manipulative. I needed undeniable, documented evidence of financial pressure and isolation. I was waiting for the moment they got greedy enough to try to force your signature. I needed them to overplay their hand, and when you told me about the refinancing papers and the family party they planned for Saturday, that was the trigger. Kimberly. That was them overplaying their hand by 1,000%. Her confession, the years of silent, strategic observation, the guilt etched onto her face, was the final confirmation that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just imagining the control. I had a co-conspirator, mandated by law and love. I returned home that evening with a dangerous, exhilarating mix of terror and righteous certainty. The house, typically quiet and passive-aggressive, was charged with tension. Lydia cornered me immediately in the kitchen, her voice deceptively casual. So, how was your little secret meeting today? Did your friend help you with your little budget spreadsheet? Her questions were probing, loaded, an obvious attempt to smoke out the truth of my afternoon. I kept my answer deliberately vague, a small victory in itself. We mostly talked about career growth and saving strategies. She gave me a tight, plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good. It's lovely you're taking initiative, because your father is quite anxious about getting those papers signed for the refinancing before the big party. He doesn't want any distractions that evening. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Cooperate, or else. Later that night, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, delivered by the least threatening person in the house, Logan. He ambled into the living room, preoccupied with his phone, humming a slightly off-key tune. "Hey, Kim," he said, not looking up. "Dad told me you're getting the final papers ready for the HELOC tomorrow. Awesome. Once he finishes the asset restructuring, he said I can put a deposit down on that new German SUV. It's got an MSRP of almost $85,000. He said he needed the house finalized to secure the loan." His boast, delivered with the easy entitlement that had defined his entire life, was the final, smoking gun connection. The $85,000 car for Logan, financed by a home equity line of credit drawn against my inheritance, secured by my coerced signature. Their plan was crystal clear. The next morning, Mark presented the refinancing documents again. He had added a personal handwritten note to the folder. "Your compliance is an act of love for your family. Kimberly." The emotional manipulation was thicker than the paper stock. He stood over me, his face tight, his fingers drumming a rapid tattoo on the countertop. "It's a simple initial on 3 places, and a signature here. I need this back before noon. Don't make this difficult. Kimberly, the party is in 2 days. Let's not have any drama." I took the pen. I held it for what felt like an eternity, my heart beating the rhythm of the coercion clause. I saw the sleek German SUV, Logan's entitled grin, Lydia's victorious, wine-red dress. I placed the pen down. My refusal was calm, deliberate, and final. "I'm not signing them, Dad. Not today. Not ever." The air in the kitchen turned instantly frigid. Mark's eyes went from frustrated to black. He didn't yell. Instead, he forced a smile, the most dangerous kind of mask. "You're tired, honey. Just think about this. Don't ruin your future over a misunderstanding." He tucked the papers back into the folder. But the way he slammed the heavy oak door to his office resonated through the house like a tectonic shift. The veneer had cracked completely. Just 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marissa. It was a high-resolution photo of the yellowed, handwritten codicil, my mother's final, resolute instruction. Marissa had sent it as a quiet reminder, a weapon locked and loaded, ready to be deployed. The sentence was bolded in the text. "The safety of Kimberly stands above all false claims of family unity." The party wasn't just a social event anymore. It was a public execution, a staged confrontation designed to force the issue. Mark and Lydia believed I was weak, isolated, and easily intimidated by an audience. They were planning to leverage the entire room to break my will. They didn't realize that I had spent the last 72 hours dissecting their plan with a high-powered legal strategist. The party was no longer their finishing move. It was our designated battlefield, where I would finally shed the role of the controlled daughter and initiate the long-overdue, devastating legal counterattack. The countdown had begun. The night of the party arrived with the heavy, humid air of a late summer storm brewing over the Rockies. Every detail of the Ross house, from the entry hall to the sprawling back patio, was orchestrated to project undeniable, effortless wealth. This wasn't a casual gathering. It was a carefully curated display of superior status. There were string quartets playing contemporary arrangements, caterers in starched white uniforms circulating with silver trays, and a bar stocked with champagne priced in the hundreds of dollars per bottle. The floral arrangements, towering sculptures of lilies and hydrangeas, alone must have cost more than my first car. Mark and Lydia hadn't hired an event planner. They had hired a status manager. The entire scene screamed of permanence, perfection, and power. My role, as always, was that of the unseen mechanic. For 7 hours leading up to the guests' arrival, I had been running point on the logistics. I coordinated the bar setup, confirmed the seating chart with the catering staff, and spent 40 minutes manually adjusting the ambient lighting to Lydia's exacting specifications. I was the silent, efficient daughter who made sure the machinery of their perfection ran smoothly. Meanwhile, Logan's duties consisted solely of appearing like a prince. He spent the afternoon in his room, playing a video game, emerging only at 7 o'clock precisely, showered, dressed in a custom-tailored navy suit, and smelling of an expensive cologne. He posed for photos with Mark and Lydia near the grand staircase, his arm casually slung around his mother, his posture radiating the easy entitlement of a favored son. He didn't lift a finger. His only function was to look like the handsome, future heir being celebrated. I retreated to my room just before the first guests arrived, giving myself 10 minutes to change into the simple, dark dress I had chosen, something invisible and unassuming. I needed to blend into the shadows. They expected me to be a prop, not a participant. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I saw Lydia descend the staircase at 7:30 p.m. The music seemed to falter. The murmur of conversation died in my throat. I stood near the kitchen entrance, clutching a tray of half-empty glasses, and froze. She was wearing the dress, the wine-red, antique lace of my mother's favorite garment, but it was no longer the elegant, slightly flowy classic my mother had worn. Lydia had taken the fabric, the sacred relic, and ruthlessly molded it to her own body. The neckline had been dramatically lowered, the waist cinched to an almost painful degree, and a modern slit added to the side skirt. The dress now screamed seduction and ownership, not memory or respect. It was a perfect, venomous update. Lydia floated down the last few steps, beaming, her jewelry catching the spotlight. She didn't look like she was honoring my mother. She looked like she was standing on my mother's grave, wearing her skin as a trophy. The profound sense of violation, of deep, visceral insult to my most cherished memory, was staggering. It felt less like a fashion choice and more like a carefully calculated act of psychological torture. She knew how much that dress meant to me. She knew that every glance at her in that gown would twist the knife in my gut. I must have looked stunned, pale, and completely incapacitated. Lydia saw me, paused mid-greet with a wealthy-looking couple, and glided over with unnerving speed. She put a perfectly manicured hand on my arm, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that still carried. "Don't be dramatic. Kimberly, don't make a scene. It's just a dress. I had it modernized to honor Sarah's taste. It's for the family celebration. Now, get that tray back to the kitchen. Dear." "It's just a dress." That phrase, delivered with such cold, patronizing dismissal, was her final declaration of victory. She had not only erased my mother, but she was mocking the memory while wearing it. Just as the formal toasts were about to begin, Mark caught me by the elbow and pulled me sharply into the secluded library, away from the guests. His eyes were hard, his demeanor tight and coiled. He placed a heavy sealed manila envelope on the mahogany desk, right next to the crystal decanter. "This is it, Kimberly," he hissed, keeping his voice strictly at a whisper. "The papers. I will call you up during my toast, in about 10 minutes. I will reference your dedication to the family's future. You will walk up, you will initial the 4 points I marked on the papers, and you will sign the final signature page, all in front of everyone. It's a show of unity. Honey, it's for the public. It's for us." His words confirmed my greatest fear. The party was the stage. The 35 guests were the jury. The signing wasn't about legal necessity. It was about public submission. They wanted to break me in front of an audience, making any future legal challenge impossible to explain. How can she claim coercion when she signed so happily at the family celebration? "I need you to look proud," he concluded, a chilling command in his voice. "Smile, Kimberly, act like the good daughter." He straightened his tie and walked out, his back rigid. My hands were shaking. My strategy, to wait for them to pressure me, had become terrifyingly real. My blood pressure must have been through the roof. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I needed confirmation, a lifeline. A final word from the only person I trusted. I typed out a message to Marissa. Something is wrong. She's wearing the dress. He just put the papers on the desk. This is the moment. The reply was instantaneous, sharp, and decisive, cutting through the chaos like a laser beam. Coming now. Do not sign. Wait for my signal. The signal. Marissa was coming. The cavalry was on its way, but the battlefield was already set. I slipped back into the main drawing room just as Mark tapped the crystal glass for silence. The music stopped. All eyes turned to him. The perfect patriarch bathed in the warm glow of the chandeliers. Mark launched into his speech, a masterclass in corporate hypocrisy, talking about legacy, stability, and the deep, unshakable foundation of the Ross family's future. He raised his glass high, smiling broadly at Lydia, who was currently basking in the admiring glances of his colleagues, the wine-red lace an obscene testament to her victory. Then came the moment, the final, subtle trap. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on me, standing awkwardly near the kitchen door. And finally, Mark announced, his voice booming with false sincerity, I want to recognize my daughter, Kimberly. She has worked so hard, and tonight, she will perform an important act of dedication to the family's future, an act of financial and emotional commitment that will secure this home and this legacy for her brother, Logan, and for the next generation. He gestured for me to come forward, toward the desk where the manila envelope waited. The pressure was immense. Every eye in the room was on me, judging, waiting for me to play my part, waiting for the good daughter to perform her final act of self-sacrifice. The moment had arrived. I was cornered. I was pushed up against the last boundary of my endurance. The air in my lungs tightened. I could feel the invisible chains of expectation, the weight of their control, the years of silent isolation pressing down on me. I looked at Lydia, glowing, triumphant, draped in my mother's dignity, and I looked at Mark, his eyes silently daring me to defy him. In that single, agonizing second, I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a person who has finally run out of room to retreat. The only direction left was forward. The confrontation wasn't coming later. It was here, the time to fight, not just for the money, but for my mother's memory and my own soul, had arrived, I knew, with absolute clarity, that if I took one more step as the compliant daughter, I would lose the war. I took a deep breath, the air thick with perfume and hypocrisy, and began to move toward the desk. The final, explosive confrontation was seconds away. I walked the 10 feet from the kitchen door to the mahogany desk, feeling the expectant gaze of 30-plus guests drilling into my back. This was the moment I was supposed to fold, to nod, to smile weakly, and sign away my future for the sake of family harmony. Mark met me by the desk, beaming with theatrical warmth. He held out the heavy manila envelope, sealed with a crisp, official-looking stamp. "Here you are, Kimberly," he announced, his voice carrying just enough to command attention. "Just a few final strokes of the pen to cement your dedication to the next generation of the Ross family." He passed me the envelope and a diamond-studded pen. I took the envelope. It felt heavy, filled with the weight of their manipulation. My fingers, surprisingly steady, tore the paper seal. I pulled out the top sheet, a bold print document that screamed Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement. I looked at Mark's smug, expectant face, then glanced quickly at Lydia, who stood nearby, sipping a glass of wine, draped in the desecrated wine-red lace. She was watching me with a victor's smirk. She had already won the psychological war, or so she thought. The moment stretched, taut and silent, like a rubber band pulled to its absolute limit. I didn't whisper, I didn't stammer. I opened my mouth and spoke clearly, loudly, cutting through the background hum of the string quartet and the ice in the glasses. "I'm sorry, Dad. I won't be signing this." Mark's smile instantly evaporated, freezing on his face like cheap plaster. I raised the document slightly, looking not at Mark, but sweeping my gaze across the horrified, confused faces of his colleagues. "This asset," I announced, keeping my voice level, broadcasting the truth to the entire room. "This house, and the investment portfolio attached to it, stand legally protected by the Sarah Ross Trust. The assets are 100% in my name, Kimberly Ross, as the sole beneficiary and primary trustee. I will not sign a document that leverages my inheritance to pay for a sports car for Logan or to facilitate any restructuring that benefits Mark or Lydia. This property belongs to me, and I will not sign it over to anyone." The silence that followed wasn't the polite quiet of a toast. It was the catastrophic hush of a glass ceiling shattering. The air fractured, thick with disbelief and scandal. Guests exchanged panicked, wide-eyed glances. The string quartet, thankfully, had the sense to stop playing entirely. Lydia was the first to react. The wine glass in her hand tightened, and I heard a sharp crack as the delicate stem buckled. She didn't drop the glass, but her face, usually so perfectly sculpted and composed, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes went completely cold. The red dress, the very symbol of her usurped status, seemed to tighten around her, making her look predatory and dangerous. Mark, recovering slightly, grabbed my arm in a vicious, public display of ownership. His grip was painfully tight, his voice a low, furious hiss meant only for me. "You don't do this here, you little idiot. You've ruined everything. Come with me, now." He physically dragged me, roughly, past the paralyzed guests and into the nearest closed space, the formal dining room, the very place where the caterers had spilled the wine an hour earlier. He slammed the heavy oak door shut with a thunderous bam, separating us from the horrified audience. The room plunged into a dark, confined space of sheer fury. "What the hell was that, Kimberly?" Mark roared, finally shedding the polite facade. "The house is ours. This is for Logan, for the family. You sign it." "It's not yours, Dad," I screamed back, adrenaline overriding years of training in silence. "It's Mom's legacy, and it's protected. It is legally mine, and I have the trust papers to prove it. It is my right." My repeated assertion of my right, the three words, "it is my right," seemed to trigger something monstrous in Lydia. She rushed the door and locked it with a sharp click. She was still wearing the dress, the cheap red wine stain now looking oddly symbolic on the white tablecloth where the papers lay. "You're right?" she shrieked, the sound high-pitched and maniacal, utterly unlike the polished Lydia the guests knew. "You have no rights here. You spoiled little relic. This house should have been ours years ago. You're nothing but the collateral damage of Sarah's melodrama." She took a massive, powerful step forward and shoved me. It was a vicious, unannounced attack. My body, exhausted and rigid from the stress, slammed hard into the edge of the antique oak serving cabinet. The impact was sickening, knocking the breath clean out of me, sending a wave of fiery pain radiating from my shoulder down my spine. This was it, the first physical assault of my adult life, delivered in the home my mother bought, by the woman wearing my mother's clothes. I stumbled, dizzy, trying to regain my footing. Before I could even raise my hands in defense, Lydia was on me again. She didn't use her fists. She raised her hand high, and the heavy lace-covered elbow of the wine-red dress slammed into the side of my head, catching my cheekbone. The fabric, the symbol of my mother's life and legacy, whipped viciously across my face as she delivered the blow. It was the ultimate sacrilegious violation. I heard a small, whimpering sound, but it wasn't me. It was the sound of my history shattering. I sank toward the floor, struggling against the dizziness, trying to fight back, but Mark had finally joined the melee. He didn't hit me, but he was just as effective. He grabbed my wrists, twisting my arms behind my back, pinning me against the wall so that I was completely immobilized. "You stop this. Kimberly, you calm down and you sign the damn papers," he grunted, the effort turning his face purple. With Mark holding me hostage, Lydia had a clear shot. She raised her hand again, her face a terrifying mask of twisted fury. As I struggled against Mark's crushing grip, I caught sight of Logan. My 19-year-old half-brother was standing right by the dining table, a spectator to the violence. He wasn't rushing in to help. He wasn't yelling for them to stop. He was leaning against the table, his arms crossed, watching the savage breakdown of his parents' control. And as Lydia prepared to strike again, he didn't look horrified. He looked annoyed, and he let out a brief, contemptuous snicker. He was enjoying the show. Just as the wine-red blur of the dress prepared to strike again, the room's absolute, venomous tension was broken by a sudden, jarring sound. The mahogany door to the dining room flew open, hitting the wall with a hollow thud. Standing in the doorway, framed against the soft ambient light of the drawing room and the shocked faces of the guests, was Marissa. My Aunt Marissa. She was holding her phone up, steady and focused, the green recording light glowing brightly. Her eyes were not frozen in horror this time. They were burning with cold, judicial fury. She didn't say a word. The phone simply captured the scene. Mark pinning me, my face bleeding, and Lydia poised to strike, wearing the dress of the woman whose memory they were destroying. The sight of Marissa, the camera, and the undeniable reality of the scene was too much. The soundproofing of the room wasn't perfect, and the door being open let the truth bleed out into the party. A woman's voice, a friend of Mark's, a wealthy local socialite, pierced the sudden silence with a high-pitched, panicked scream. "My God! Call 911. Get a doctor. Call the police." The chaos of the outside world, the real world, finally broke through the polite, false walls of the Ross home. The scream of a stranger, the urgent command to call the emergency services. It was the ultimate necessary cry for help, an action I had been too terrified, too compromised, and too physically immobilized to perform myself. The House of Silence had finally been forced to speak. The final, devastating act of coercion was over. My fight for safety, and for justice, had officially begun. The hospital room was blessedly quiet, a stark, white contrast to the chaotic, blood-red world I had just left. After they stabilized the immediate damage, a young doctor with the weary eyes of a resident confirmed the full extent of the physical betrayal. My right shoulder, the one Mark had pinned with such vicious intent, was confirmed to have a grade 2 AC joint sprain. My left wrist was severely bruised and sprained from where I had slammed against the cabinet. The neck pain, the whiplash from Lydia's shove, was categorized as cervical trauma. The doctor outlined the recovery: weeks in a sling, physical therapy, and strong anti-inflammatories. The diagnosis was clinical, but the implication was loud. This was violence. The physical pain was manageable, dulled by the steady drip in my arm. The emotional pain was slowly being replaced by a cool, sharp clarity. The first official gatekeeper of my new life arrived. Ms. Davis, a hospital social worker. She was a middle-aged woman with a calming, steady presence, her clipboard the only thing standing between me and the storm outside. "Kimberly," she began, her voice low and non-judgmental, "my job is to help you safely transition out of the hospital. We need to assess your living situation. I have to ask you, very frankly, are you safe to return to that environment?" The question was simple, direct, and terrifyingly pivotal. For 10 years, I had lived under the illusion that I was safe, merely neglected. I had convinced myself that the emotional violence was just life and that I was strong enough to endure it. Now, lying here, documented with a broken shoulder and a sprained neck, the answer was undeniable. I looked at Ms. Davis, met her steady gaze, and spoke the truth I had denied for a decade. "No, I am not safe. I cannot go back." The words felt like a key turning in a lock, releasing years of accumulated pressure. Saying it out loud, formally admitting the Ross house was a hostile environment, was the first, irrevocable step toward independence. Ms. Davis simply nodded, making a note on her form that flagged my case as high-risk domestic violence. Not 10 minutes later, the door opened and Marissa walked in, followed by Ms. Vance, the attorney, Marissa looked exhausted, but utterly resolute. She didn't offer apologies or tears. She offered action. "We need to work fast. Kimberly," Marissa said, her voice tight with urgency. "Mark and Lydia are currently being interviewed by the police downstairs. They're claiming it was a misunderstanding and a drunken fall on your part. We have a 48-hour window to secure your position." She handed me her phone, the cracked screen now displaying a video file. "I want you to see this." I took the phone, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. I pressed play. The scene flickered into horrifying life. The mahogany desk, the crystal decanter, the spilled wine on the pristine linen. There was Mark's roar, my own sharp, desperate scream of, "It is my right!" Then the sickening shove against the cabinet. I watched the blur of the wine-red dress flying as Lydia struck my face. I watched Mark pin my arms, trapping me, enabling the attack. I saw Logan in the corner, his arms crossed, his contemptuous half-smile flickering into focus before the recording ended. Watching the violence was traumatic, but necessary. It wasn't the blurry, chaotic memory of trauma. It was objective, undeniable evidence. The dress, that sacred relic, the symbol of my mother's elegance, was the weapon. Lydia wasn't just hitting me. She was assaulting me while wearing my mother's ghost. It was more than proof of battery. It was proof of malice and desecration. As the video looped for the second time, Ms. Vance leaned in. "That footage, Kimberly, is the final boundary. It demonstrates clear, overt coercion, physical abuse, and a flagrant attempt to pressure you into signing legal documents. It is the undeniable trigger for your mother's coercion and good faith clause." The full implications of the legal architecture Mom had built rushed through me. This wasn't just criminal battery. It was a breach of fiduciary trust. Mark had not only failed to protect me, but he had actively participated in my assault in an attempt to steal my assets. The moment that video was recorded, Ms. Vance continued, "Mark Ross effectively revoked his own executive rights to the trust. We can file an emergency petition immediately. We are cutting him off, completely. He will have zero legal access, zero ability to sign, and zero control over the house, the investment portfolio, or your affairs. He is done." The sense of tectonic shift was dizzying. The man who had controlled my life, my money, and my choices for 10 years was about to be legally ejected from the framework of my existence. Marissa then took the lead, her voice professional, like a second lawyer. "We have to secure your physical distance. I have the papers ready. We need to file for an emergency protective order, immediately. This will legally bar Mark and Lydia from coming within 100 yards of you, and it will prevent them from contacting you, verbally or electronically. We need to make sure you are safe when you leave this hospital." I didn't hesitate. There was no internal debate, no lingering doubt about family. That concept had been beaten out of me, literally, by a woman in my mother's dress. Ms. Vance produced a series of documents, and for the next 30 minutes, I signed. I signed with fierce, renewed certainty, despite the pain in my shoulder. First, I signed the formal affidavit of intent to activate the coercion clause, permanently removing Mark Ross's executive rights and transferring all authority to Marissa and myself, co-trustees. Second, I signed the police report, formally charging Lydia Ross with felony battery and assault, and Mark Ross with restraint and complicity in the assault. I insisted on detailed notes on the psychological aspect. Lydia wearing the dress. Third, I signed the application for the emergency protective order, making the physical distance between us a matter of law. Fourth, and perhaps most satisfyingly, I signed the bank account transfer forms, immediately moving my entire salary and all current savings out of the joint account Lydia had controlled and into a new, individual account that she would never see. As I initialed the last form, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, but it was the cleansing exhaustion of a battle won, not a battle lost. Marissa took my hand, not as a legal consultant, but as my mother's sister. Her eyes were suddenly wet with genuine tears. "I'm sorry," Kimberly, she confessed, her voice thick. I've lived with that guilt for years. Sarah told me exactly what would happen. She said, Marissa, don't move until Kimberly is 25, or until they try to take the house from her by force. I stayed silent because the trust demanded proof, an undeniable moment of overt coercion to survive the legal challenge Mark would mount. I knew I had to be the witness. I had to let them overplay their hand to save you, and I almost waited too long. But I promise you, sweetie, my silence is over. It stops now. We are going to fight them with every legal weapon Sarah gave us. Her confession didn't absolve her of the years of distance, but it reframed her silence as a strategic defense, not as apathy. It confirmed that I was not alone. I had been part of a carefully laid plan all along. The final question from Ms. Davis came as they prepared my discharge papers. Where will you be staying? Kimberly, we need a verified safe address. I looked down at the sling on my arm, at the paperwork signed in black ink, my ticket to freedom, the image of the perfect, blood-stained mahogany dining room, the wine-red lace, the silent, laughing Logan flashed through my mind. I am not going back, I said, my voice firm, resolute. I will not set foot in that house again, ever. I have a safe place to go. The decision was final, a clean break. The submissive daughter who had lived under their thumb was gone. She had been beaten out of existence, and in her place was a woman who was legally armed, strategically supported, and utterly determined to take back every single thing that belonged to her. The battle for the assets was just beginning, but the battle for my soul was already won. The first move of the revenge story was complete. Marissa's apartment in Aurora was a welcome contrast to the gilded sterility of the Ross mansion. It was smaller, warmer, and filled with the comfortable, slightly eclectic mess of a life lived authentically. For the first 3 days after my discharge, the apartment became our war room. The medical documents were stacked next to the legal binders, and the coffee pot never went cold. My shoulder was throbbing, a constant reminder of the physical assault, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The paralysis of fear had been replaced by the cold, meticulous focus of a data analyst given a complex, deeply personal problem to solve. My goal was no longer survival, it was restoration. The first and most critical task was the consolidation of evidence. I sat with Miss Vance and Marissa for 8 hours, reconstructing the timeline of the psychological and financial abuse. I had saved every piece of electronic communication over the past 3 years. We sifted through hundreds of emails and text messages, looking for patterns of coercion, control, and financial pressure. We compiled a dossier, the financial control, spreadsheets documenting how, for 6 years, Mark and Lydia insisted I deposit 90% of my salary into an account they managed, giving me a meager $50 weekly allowance. This clearly established a pattern of economic exploitation and dependence. The forced residency. Mark's repeated emails over the past 2 years insisting I remain at home, stating, "It is crucial for your financial health," directly contradicting my ability to establish independence. The refinancing pressure. The explicit texts and notes from Mark, culminating in the demand to sign the papers at the party, established the clear intent to defraud the trust and constituted the final act of overt coercion necessary to trigger the coercion clause. Marissa, meanwhile, handled the security of the video footage. She had the original file uploaded to 3 separate cloud services and copied onto 2 encrypted hard drives. Ms. Vance assured me that the quality and context, Lydia attacking me while wearing my mother's dress, made it an irrefutable piece of evidence in both the criminal and civil cases. The second crucial step was financial severance. I spent an entire morning on the phone with my bank, executing the transfer forms I had signed in the hospital. I moved my entire salary, plus the small balance left in the managed account, into the new, private account I had established. I then changed my direct deposit information with Heliovera Dynamics. The change was immediate. For the first time since I started working, my monthly paycheck would go directly, and exclusively to me. The feeling of financial autonomy was intoxicating, the most potent drug I had ever experienced. The silence from the Ross house was deafening, broken only by the sharp, desperate communications from my former abusers. Logan was the first to violate the silence, sending a series of emotional, self-pitying text messages to my old number. Since I hadn't blocked him yet, they came through. Kim, you know Dad is furious. This is embarrassing. You ruined the party for everyone. We were supposed to get the car next week. You need to come home and fix this. This is so typical of you, always making drama. Just sign the papers and let Dad sort it out. Why are you punishing the family for something that was an accident? The messages, sent in a fit of entitled rage, were a gift. They were further irrefutable evidence that the assault was directly linked to the refusal to sign the financial documents. Logan was inadvertently building our case, reinforcing the narrative that the family's fury stemmed from financial denial, not concern for my welfare. I archived every single message, forwarding them to Ms. Vance immediately. Mark attempted a slightly more sophisticated route. He tried to call 7 times over a 2-day period. When that failed, he sent a single email to my work address, cloaked in fake paternal concern. Kimberly, your mother and I are deeply concerned about your welfare. Come home immediately so we can discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding and stop this legal nonsense. You know you don't need an outside lawyer. We can resolve this internally. The email, a clear attempt at reconciliation under false pretenses, was the final act of control. Within 10 minutes, Mark received an email in reply, not from me, but from Ms. Vance. It was short, cold, and legally devastating. Any further attempt to contact Ms. Ross will be considered a direct violation of the emergency protective order filed yesterday and will be reported to the Denver Police Department. All communication regarding the Sarah Ross Trust must be directed through my office. The legal barrier was now firmly in place, a shield of paper and law separating me from their coercion. In the quiet evenings, nursing my injury, I began my personal work of healing. Understanding the pattern, I created a meticulous, analytical timeline of control. I broke down the 23 years of my life into 2 columns: life with Mom and life with Lydia and Mark. Event age Mark and Lydia's action, subtext, control mechanism, Mom's death, emotional withdrawal, isolation, grief. Lydia's arrival, 15, praised for maturity, role reversal, designated parent. Logan's birth, San. Assigned childcare duties, systematic devaluation, unpaid labor, college, job 22. Forced to live at home, financial crippling, forced dependence. Salary management. Managed 90% of income, economic exploitation, the signature asset, the dress attack. Physical assault, coercion, absolute dominance, final act of theft. Looking at the table, the subtle, insidious pattern was revealed. The lack of love wasn't arbitrary. It was strategic. They hadn't neglected me. They had engineered my vulnerability to ensure I remained a compliant trustee and a resident without leverage. It wasn't until I had proof in my hand that I realized the true cost of their perfection. The price was everything I owned, everything I earned, and ultimately, my physical safety. One afternoon, as we reviewed Mark's spending habits against the trust's original accounts, Marissa finally opened up about the past, adding a disturbing historical context to the current crisis. Your mother wasn't just worried about Mark's priorities. Kim, Marissa said, her eyes fixed on the financial statements. She was terrified of his greed before she even had the trust drawn up. When she was already very sick, Mark tried to get her to sign a power of attorney that would have given him control over all her assets, including the life insurance policies. He was trying to drain her accounts even as she was going through chemotherapy. Marissa paused, her voice hardening. Sarah refused. Obviously, that's when she called her lawyer and changed the whole structure of her will. She told the lawyer, and she told me, that Mark was already emotionally checked out, viewing her only as a liability. He viewed the assets as his inheritance, not yours. That's why she made the trust irrevocable and made me the backup executor. Your mother knew. Kim. She knew he wouldn't just replace her. He would try to erase her completely and steal everything she worked for. The revelation solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about a house or a car. This was a historical battle for my mother's dignity and foresight. Mark wasn't just a controlling father. He was a thief who had been lying in wait for 10 years. My initial shock, anger, and desire for vengeance began to distill into something cleaner, colder, and far more lethal: justice. I don't want to hurt him, Marissa, I finally confessed, the sling restricting my movement, but not my determination. I don't need to see him suffer. The only revenge I need is the restoration of everything they took: the house, the money, and the ability to live my life without their ghost looming over me. Marissa gave me a look of profound respect. That, Kimberly, is the sharpest kind of revenge. You're not going for the emotional blow. You're going for the structural demolition. You're taking back the foundation they tried to build their new life on. I nodded. The next phase was clear. The civil case to liquidate Mark's assets within the trust's legal bounds, the criminal case against Lydia for battery, and the permanent severance of all ties. I looked at the timeline, the ugly, systematic pattern of my abuse. I had been a victim for 23 years. But the woman who left the hospital, armed with a lawyer, a witness, and a video of the crime, was about to become the hunter. The game of control was over. The game of consequences had just begun. The courtroom was a small, functional space on the 3rd floor of the Denver courthouse, reserved for initial motions and protective orders. It was a place where life's ugliest disputes were given a brief, sterile examination before being scheduled for deeper scrutiny. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocatingly formal, and utterly devoid of the forced cheer that had defined the Ross home. I sat beside Ms. Vance, my shoulder still braced in a sling, a constant, visible testament to the violence I had suffered. My gaze was fixed on the opposition's table. Mark, Lydia, and Logan were there, sitting in a tight, defensive cluster. They were clearly exhausted, having spent the previous 72 hours dealing with police interviews, legal briefings, and the massive social fallout from their ruined party. They had lost the battle for the narrative in the court of public opinion the moment the police were called. Lydia was dressed in a severely plain black dress, modest, somber, almost religious in its humility. The wine-red lace was conspicuously absent. The woman who had worn my mother's dignity as a weapon now looked like she was in mourning for her own shattered reputation. Mark, next to her, looked physically diminished. His corporate sheen replaced by a puffy, tired look. He kept running a hand over his face, looking like a man who had suddenly realized the true cost of his greed. Logan, however, was the picture of resentful youth. He was dressed sharply, but his posture was sulky. He wasn't there to support his parents. He was there to observe the destruction of his promised future. The $85,000 German SUV suddenly a remote fantasy. As the proceedings began, Mark's lawyer, a nervous man named Mr. Thompson, immediately attempted to negotiate. "Your Honor," Mr. Thompson began, rising stiffly, "my clients strongly believe this is a private family matter that can and should be resolved in-house. We propose mediation to discuss the immediate return of Ms. Kimberly Ross to the family residence and a cessation of these, frankly, baseless criminal charges." Ms. Vance stood up, calm and imposing, her voice resonating clearly. "Your Honor, we strenuously object to any suggestion of in-house resolution. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a documented case of aggravated battery linked directly to financial coercion and attempted fraud against a trust. Ms. Ross's medical and financial records clearly demonstrate the sustained pattern of abuse. We will not be mediating our way out of felony charges or out of a protective order. We are here to enforce the law and the trust." The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a bored expression that belied her sharp mind, nodded curtly. "Proceed with the motion for the permanent protective order, Ms. Vance." The presentation of our evidence was cold, clinical, and devastating. The prosecutor for the criminal battery charge, who was observing the motion, presented the initial evidence. We started with my hospital records: the grade 2 AC joint sprain, the sprained wrist, the cervical trauma. Then, Ms. Vance's paralegal set up the courtroom projector. The lights dimmed. The silence returned, more intense than before. The video footage from Marissa's phone filled the screen. The entire room watched in horrified clarity as Mark's handsome facade cracked, his vicious grip on my arm visible to all. They watched Lydia, in the red lace dress, shove me against the cabinet, and then, the sickening climax. The dress-clad arms swinging, the sound of the blow barely audible but its intent undeniable. The video looped, playing the assault 3 times in total. Mark whispered loudly to his lawyer, "It was a minor scuffle, a misunderstanding." But the video was a silent, unblinking witness that betrayed every lie. Ms. Vance followed the video with the financial evidence, the emails, the texts, the timeline documenting the forced financial dependence over 6 years. She painted a clear picture. Kimberly Ross was not just a victim of domestic violence. She was the object of a decade-long financial conspiracy. Marissa was called to the stand. She was cool, collected, and direct. She described the creation of the trust, her role as co-trustee, and her instruction to film the party. She was asked about the red dress. "Mrs. Hayes, can you confirm who that dress belonged to?" Ms. Vance asked. "It belonged to my sister, Sarah Ross," Marissa stated firmly. "And what was your reaction to seeing Mrs. Lydia Ross assault your niece while wearing that garment?" Marissa's voice cracked slightly, but her eyes held steady on the judge. "It was a deliberate act of profound emotional cruelty. Your Honor, she hit Kimberly while wearing my sister's dress. It was the final sign that they were determined to destroy every part of Sarah's legacy, including my niece." The climax of the day arrived when Ms. Vance introduced the email exchange regarding Logan's car. It wasn't Lydia's note to Logan, but a previous email Lydia had sent to Mark 2 days before the party, which Ms. Vance had obtained via discovery. Lydia's email, stark white on the courtroom screen, read, "We need this done immediately. Once Kimberly signs, we can finalize the HELOC and transfer the maximum allowable equity. That money goes straight to the capital fund and Logan's car. Her signature is the only thing standing between Logan and his future. We need her to sign before she figures out the trust is even more restrictive than we thought." Lydia's head snapped up. Her face, already pale, lost all color. The email wasn't just proof of coercion. It was a clear admission of premeditated intent to defraud the very trust she was supposed to respect. The judge didn't even retire to chambers. She looked over the evidence, then directly at Mark and Lydia. Given the overwhelming visual and documentary evidence linking physical assault to financial coercion, I find that Ms. Kimberly Ross's life and assets are in immediate and sustained jeopardy from the respondents. Mark and Lydia Ross, the judge announced. She issued her ruling with chilling efficiency. The emergency protective order was immediately extended into a temporary 3-year order. Mark and Lydia were barred from the property, which legally belonged to the trust, and were given 48 hours to collect necessary personal belongings under police escort. Furthermore, the judge ordered the immediate sequestration of Mark Ross's residual assets related to the trust and set a formal hearing date for the criminal battery and civil breach of fiduciary duty cases. As the court adjourned, the atmosphere dissolved into the tense scramble of lawyers and bailiffs. Mark and Lydia were surrounded by their counsel, looking like 2 statues of defeat. I stood to leave, gathering my documents, as I walked past the opposition's table. Logan stepped out, blocking my path. His face was twisted in a cold, petty fury that mirrored his mother's earlier rage. "You've gone too far, Kim," he spat, keeping his voice low, but vibrating with hatred. "All of this drama, just because you're jealous of what Mom and Dad did for me. You're ruining our family's life over some old house." I looked at my younger brother, the pampered prince whose entitlement had fueled the entire disaster. I looked at the brace on my arm, the black dress of my aunt, and the image of my mother's dress used as a weapon. The years of silence and compliance were over. I met his gaze, my eyes cold, my voice utterly steady. "You don't understand." "Logan," I told him, the truth ringing with finality. "This isn't me going too far. This is the very first time I've gone far enough." I walked past him, Marissa falling in step beside me. The battle for the house and the fortune was far from over, but the structural integrity of the Ross family's facade had been completely demolished. The next phase would be the full-scale legal war, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was finally ready to fight. The day of the full trust hearing arrived 3 months later. This time, we were in a high-ceilinged courtroom, the kind with heavy wooden benches and stained glass windows, indicating the gravity of the proceedings. The hallway outside was packed, not just with lawyers, but with local reporters. The story, tech executive accused of battery and trust fraud to fund stepson's luxury car, had become a local sensation. I walked in with Marissa and Ms. Vance, my head held high. My sling was gone, replaced by the deep, physical scar tissue that served as a better reminder. Mark and Lydia looked like ghosts of their former selves. The pressure of the legal battles, the social humiliation, and the sudden cessation of their cash flow had aged them 10 years. They had been forced to liquidate some of their personal investments just to pay their defense counsel, and the strain was visible. Logan was absent. He had returned to college, presumably trying to distance himself from the toxic fallout. Ms. Vance opened our case with meticulous precision, laying out the foundation of the Sarah Ross Trust. She presented the original documents showing me as the sole primary beneficiary and Marissa as the co-trustee. She then introduced the core argument, the coercion and good faith clause, which explicitly mandated the removal of Mark's fiduciary rights upon evidence of sustained pressure or violence against me. Mark's lawyer, having failed on the criminal front, tried to pivot hard on the civil side. He argued that the trust was based on excessive paranoid restrictions by a mother on her deathbed, and that Mark was simply acting with the best intentions of a loving father. Mr. Assas was simply trying to ensure financial prudence, Mr. Thompson argued passionately. His daughter, despite her career, is young and inexperienced. The alleged coercion was merely a firm parental request for filial cooperation in a time of necessary family restructuring. This court should not allow a misunderstanding to destroy a family unit over a question of filial piety. He used the word filial piety repeatedly, trying to paint me as an ungrateful daughter destroying her stepmother and father. Ms. Vance's rebuttal was brief and devastating. "Your Honor, filial piety does not require the beneficiary of a trust to be physically assaulted by her stepmother while her father holds her arms when she refuses to sign away her inheritance. We will not entertain the notion that good intentions include battery." Then, she presented the most damaging piece of evidence, the handwritten codicil. Marissa was recalled to the stand. She was asked to confirm the handwriting. "This document," Marissa said, her voice full of sorrow and conviction, "was written by my sister 3 weeks before her passing. It was her final, desperate attempt to protect her daughter." Ms. Vance read the key line aloud, her voice ringing across the courtroom. "If Mark or anyone associated with him ever places a hand upon Kimberly in violence, or uses physical force to coerce her signature, all of his rights to this trust, and all claims to this property, are to be immediately and permanently severed, vesting all authority in Kimberly and her Aunt Marissa." The language was simple, direct, and legally unassailable. It turned the assault into the ultimate, unforgivable legal offense. Next, the video was played one final time, projected onto the massive screen. The courtroom fell silent, the clip of the wine-red lace striking my face seeming to suck all the air out of the room. This time, the image was not just evidence of a crime, it was the visual proof of Mark's financial suicide. Following the video, Ms. Vance called a surprise witness. "Mrs. Gaum, Henderson, a wealthy neighbor of the Rosses who had attended the disastrous party. Mrs. Henderson testified that, in the months prior to the incident, Mark had complained to her husband about the tyranny of the trust. Mr. Ross told my husband that he needed to get Kimberly to sign papers because he was locked out of the property's equity, Mrs. Henderson recounted. He said he had to control the situation to get the capital for Logan's future. He explicitly said he was going to isolate the girl and force her hand. The testimony confirmed premeditation and financial intent behind the isolation and coercion. The judge called a 15-minute recess to review the mountains of evidence. When she returned, the courtroom was packed, the reporters leaning forward expectantly. The judge cleared her throat, her voice cold and absolute. This court finds the evidence presented by the petitioner, Ms. Kimberly Ross, to be compelling and irrefutable. The documentary evidence, specifically the emails demonstrating the intent to leverage the property for personal gain, and the video evidence confirming physical assault directly tied to the refusal to sign legal documents, constitutes a clear and severe breach of fiduciary duty by Mr. Mark Ross and an act of aggravated battery by Ms. Lydia Ross. She then delivered the final, devastating blows. Pursuant to the explicit terms of the Sarah Ross Trust's coercion clause and the handwritten codicil, the court hereby orders the permanent, irreversible removal of Mr. Mark Ross from any and all executory and beneficiary roles within the trust. He retains no claim, no control, and no access to the trust's assets. Furthermore, the court finds Ms. Lydia Ross has no standing whatsoever to claim any interest in the trust's assets, the Denver property, and the investment portfolio valued at over $750,000 are immediately and irrevocably vested in Miss Kimberly Ross, with Ms. Marissa Hayes serving as temporary co-trustee until Ms. Ross no longer requires her protection. It was over. The house, the fortune, the complete independence. It was all mine. My mother's foresight had won. Lydia, who had maintained a brittle composure throughout the trial, suddenly shattered. She leaped up, letting out a raw, desperate wail of defeat and pure financial ruin, her hands clutching her head. "No, that house is ours. Logan needs that money." A bailiff was instantly beside her, firmly pushing her back into her seat. Her quiet black dress did nothing to hide the monstrous rage that had just cost her everything. Mark looked at the floor, his face pale and drawn. As the bailiffs moved to secure the area, he looked up at me, a flicker of his old fake charm returning, desperate and pathetic. "Kimberly, please," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "We are still your family, aren't we? We can still fix this. Just the three of us." I walked up to the bar, retrieved my documents, and looked down at the man who had traded his love for a delusion of wealth. My voice was calm, utterly devoid of emotion, a final, cold statement of fact. Family doesn't trap you, Dad, and family certainly doesn't hit you while wearing your dead mother's dress. I turned and walked away. The afternoon sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Marissa and I stepped out onto the granite steps. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions, blinding us with flash photography. Marissa simply placed a protective hand on my back, guiding me through the crowd and into a waiting car. I didn't look back. The noise, the lights, the shattered lives of the Rosses. It was all just data now, filed and resolved. The story of control, sacrifice, and quiet revenge had reached its necessary conclusion, not with a drawn-out epilogue of consequences, but right here, at the peak moment of victory. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.